When historians look back at the Trump administration, they'll likely point to yesterday as a turning point, 10:31 a.m. Eastern Time to be precise. That's when Bloomberg News posted a story entitled, "Mueller Expands Probe to Trump Business Transactions." The story appeared a little over 12 hours after the president told the New York Times that Robert Mueller had no right to investigate his business transactions. Mueller, through Bloomberg, sent back the clearest possible message. Yes, I do, and I will. Now, what are those transactions? Well, basically any commercial activity that Trump or his family or his associates conducted over the last decade that might pertain to Russia or anyone who has ever lived in Russia. According to Bloomberg, those would include Russian purchases of apartments in Trump buildings, Trump's involvement in a Soho development in New York with Russian associates, the 2013 Miss Universe pageant, which was held in Moscow, and Trump's sale of a Florida mansion to a Russian in 2008. That's right. The investigation created to determine whether the Russian government influenced the Trump-Hillary race now extends to the private sale of a house in Florida some Russian guy bought 9 years ago during the Bush administration. Talk about mission creep. Let's be clear about the politics here. This is a massive threat to the White House. A determined prosecutor can prove almost anything he wants. A prosecutor with no time limit or budget or accountability to voters, there is nobody more dangerous than that. Throw in Russia and all bets are off. Russia is a sketchy place. Virtually any financial transaction in that country could be construed as criminal by an American prosecutor out for blood. Ever bought a pack of cigarettes in Moscow? An independent prosecutor could probably nail you for money laundering. America's got a ton of laws. It all depends on how you want to interpret and enforce them. So it's hard to overstate just how bad this is for the administration. The Trump White House has lost control of its fate thanks to Robert Mueller. That's dawning on them now, and it may account for some of the turmoil we've seen over there this week. But it's also sad as hell, especially for voters. They elected Trump. You may not like it, but voters had their reasons, and they're supposed to be allowed to pick their own leaders. That's not at all the view from Washington, where Trump is seen as a terrifying threat to the permanent ruling class, which has been working for more than a year to neutralize him. Hours after the election, we were told that the results were not legitimate or even real. A foreign government must have done this. There is no other logical explanation for this. When evidence of Russian involvement failed to surface, we were urged to have the Justice Department investigate it all, just to make certain we owed it to our democracy. 9 months later, nobody is talking like that anymore. Questions of collusion and Russian hacking look like irrelevant footnotes at this point. Now investigators are trying to figure out why Trump once sold a Manhattan apartment to a Russian buyer. There's got to be something there. And maybe in the end we'll find out there is. It is the New York real estate business after all. But at what cost? Voters have learned a lot of sad lessons from this Russia story. They've learned their president does not always handle pressure well. They've learned their elites in Washington are as susceptible to mass hysteria as any medieval peasant village. But saddest of all, they have learned that despite all the talk of democracy, they're not really in charge of their own government. People who are never elected are. Jonathan Turley is a law professor at George Washington University Law School, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
So this is an investigation that went from trying to determine whether or not Russia had an effect in the election outcome in 2016 and is now looking at real estate transactions in the United States between Trump's companies and Russian citizens from 10 years ago. How do we get from one to the other?
Well, first of all, the mandate that was given to Mueller is perhaps the most vague and ambiguous mandate I've seen for a special counsel or independent counsel. It's basically one line that says investigate this election controversy. Nothing else. There's no specific reference to crimes. And so you could really drive a semi through that language, and that's what's going to happen. What people need to understand is that any special counsel investigation tends to have some mission creep. It tends to broaden with time.
Oh, yeah.
If you start with very broad language, they will fill that space and they'll likely go beyond it. So I think that Mueller is going to be able to fit this financial investigation under that language because that's what he was given by Rosenstein.
I just don't believe that any person who does business in Russia, no matter how well-meaning and scrupulous, could survive a forensic look into those business deals. I mean, I honestly think if I had dinner in Russia last year, I could be arrested under U.S. law. So, I mean, this seems like a real threat.
It is a real threat. I mean, the fact is, look, we've never had a president with this extensive portfolio that's transnational in character. These are transactions all around the world. They're very large. They tend to be messy. Now, these are special counsel investigators, but they're federal investigators. They're FBI agents. They're federal prosecutors. If they see a crime, they don't just walk away. They'll refer it to the FBI or they'll take it themselves. But that creates a very high risk for this administration.
So I think it's fair to say that voters, who really are the point of this whole exercise, knew that Trump did business in Russia. He did not release his tax returns. They were very aware of that, and they elected him anyway. And so from the Trump administration's point of view, this is all a disingenuous effort to nullify the election results. That's how they feel about it, and I think they have a point. What can they do about it? Anything?
Well, there's not much they can do about it. I mean, the fact is, I can understand the frustration for people in the White House. This is a lot like having a cop literally behind your car on the highway, just moving with you as you watch the speedometer and make sure you don't go over 60. It's sort of unnerving. And that's going to be the reality for a while for the Trump administration. It's like complaining about the weather. I think that they need to get a strategy. They have to stop acting tactically. That's what they've been doing. They've been a few steps behind, and they've been reacting. They need an overarching strategy, and they need to keep a single, coherent, and consistent narrative. That's the most important thing. You're going to have 3 major players going in front of committees, perhaps next week.
Yes.
That's the most dangerous time for this administration.
That's for sure. Holy smokes. Professor Turley, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker.